And I would invite does anybody have a question they want to raise with our group up here?
So, yeah.
If you do, if you just talk to the microphone so the folks online can also hear you.
Nick, question. What is plan B for the hospital and Winding Waters? When after budget cuts, yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking about that a lot these days. And it starts with, okay, who cares the most? How do we make sure we hold that team together? I mean, one of the things Liza and I were just talking about is we find people who are committed as much as we can. We find people who are committed to what we're doing. And then they go, oh, and how much do you pay? And, oh, do I get a little time off? And I'm hopeful that we can engage all those minds to make it work.
What can we do to help?
No, I mean, I think advocacy matters. I think. Yeah, I know. How do we get the people who do funding to listen? There are essential benefits that we each receive, being a high need, a health professional shortage area. That if we don't have those benefits from the feds, it will be bad. We will have to make cuts. I think. Yep, I'm just really hopeful that the healthcare programs, in particular in rural places, will be a little bit more protected from some of the cuts that are coming. And it's
monthly hospital options.
Yeah. Well, and we do, like, each of our organizations that provides care in the community and gets federal or state benefits through Medicare and Medicaid programs, like, we each do optional things, right? Those would be the first things that we would have to trim. Like the core services and the services where we actually make revenue independent of federal grants or sort of enhanced reimbursements. We may have to revert more to what was the private practice model, but
I think that I'm going to move us on just so we get a couple other questions. But your first response, Nick, struck me because I think it also ties back to what Mike and Liza Jane talked about. And certainly I think people at Wallowa Resources feel like you come here because of sort of a commitment and passion to this place and the ideals and the opportunities to do something that matters. Right. And you said that's the first point, right? And then afterwards they say, well, how much do you pay? And blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Those are the people we know are going to be a good fit.
And we talk about that often, that a lot of people that come out here are sort of mission values oriented first. They're not, you don't come out here, generally speaking, to try to make a mint, sort of like you and your brothers, right? So I think that's an important thing. And it also ties back to the opportunity, I think, that both Mike and Liza Jane were talking about. If that's something that we share fundamentally, we need to draw on that to pull people together, right? And figure out, okay, let's build off of that common starting point to figure out what we want to save. We want to save this incredible healthcare system and many other attributes that brought us here and that we value here. Other questions for our panelists? Evelyn, then Bobby. Oh, sorry. One online.
From our online. What sources of federal funding that support sectors of Wallowa County economy and services are at risk of being reduced or eliminated by the current administration?
All of them.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I think it is all.
Yeah. In
So what are the
agriculture,
biggest ones? Yeah.
I can tell you our, like through NRCS, and those are all those contracts that we signed and agreed to do the work are not honored anymore. So
yeah,
I'd say all of them.
Yeah. And our funding from Forest Service, NRCS, BLM is frozen. We don't really know what that means and what it's going to pan out to be. We know there's questions about the future of the VA clinic in Enterprise.
trying to help with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it is across the board.
And they froze and unfroze federal healthcare funding, at least that affects us. And then, yeah, there are a lot of dollars in enhanced funding for critical access hospitals, federally qualified health centers, and certified community behavioral health clinics that could be affected.
All right. Are we going to Bobby first? Okay.
So I have a question, and Mike, this is not to give you a hard time, but it is kind of to put you on the spot. Some of my best friends in Wallowa County are well-educated young women who came home to take over agricultural operations. And I tend to think that when we're looking for the replacement generation who's going to consider the value proposition, you're going to see a lot more Liza Janes than you're going to see brothers.
Well, well, I would agree. I mean, we have a lot of examples of that. The McLaren Ranch comes to mind with 3 girls to start with. And since I used to work with a forum, the Butterfield clan might argue because they seem to have a slew of boys. So I don't care whether it's the girls or the boys, as long as somebody comes back and manages the land and keeps calling this home.
Evelyn was,
Well, I was thinking of the relationship of the younger people and the older people, and how the older people are considered, I think, not that important, and that we do have the money that we brought and our disappearing Social Security. And I think that we have contributed a lot, those of us who moved in when we retired. And we helped out with the nonprofit organizations. So we've contributed quite a bit of money, I think. But I didn't see that up there on the chart. And then, as you know, I'm interested in housing, and the big thing is if those of us who have big houses with big yards that we can't take care of anymore would had a chance, an opportunity, know how to leave our big houses and into smaller houses, perhaps, or live in a community of where we would care for ourselves, then the workforce housing could move in. It seems like a no-brainer that we would have more workforce housing available and economically. And that's not a question. Can you take a question out of that?
yeah, no. I mean, first, I think even if we missed it on the chart, I think certainly everybody at Wallowa Resources and I'm sure many people in the community appreciate the role that every generation is playing, and the importance not just of knowledge and community support that retired people play, older people play, but we're also facing the biggest generational transfer of wealth that the country's ever going to experience. And many rural communities, and I'm trying to think right now, I think it's Nebraska Community Foundation has really turned this into a model for small community rural revitalization by making sure that people connected to those places are planning, doing their estate planning to make sure that that money is reinvested in their own community. And I think all of that's important. I totally agree with you in terms of the importance of intergenerational housing too, and the opportunity that could occur by allowing people in houses that are bigger than they currently need as their families have moved on, to move into smaller houses so that those other houses could be home to a family again. We are still very much in the learning process of all the different programs that support housing and how complicated it is. But I think there are definitely still opportunities there. But we have only managed to build 2 homes and refurbish 1 so far. From a state and federal perspective, they think we're far exceeding, expectations. To me, we've fallen well below, but it is a very complicated field when we're trying to do this in a way that leaves the houses that we've helped transfer still to be affordable. That the cost factor of building homes and refurbishing homes relative to incomes here is a challenge. And preparing for this, I was amazed by the fact that I think in 1946, with inflation adjusted dollars, the average wage here was $46,000. In 99 or in the 1990s, it was $36,000 after the mills shut down. And right now it is 45 and change. It hasn't even come back to what it was in 1970. And at the same time, housing prices have gone up, astronomically. So we've got problems. We're still trying to work it out. So that's also not necessarily an answer to your statement, but it speaks to it.
Wait, can I just real quick on that? The other thing is, when Wallowa Resources started, nobody said we've got a workforce housing problem there. I mean, it's a relatively new thing, and so we're kind of feeling our way along. But we've been criticized by some members of the community for being even involved in it, because that wasn't, they think, part of our original mission and goals. And so someone, what can the community do? Well, we can always use some voices out there talking about these issues and supporting our organization when we work on things like workforce housing.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all for taking the stage. We live in this environment in the West where precipitation patterns and weather patterns and soils and things create some circumstances that lead to landscapes that are extensive, and the economic return coming out of those landscapes are extensive and large. And so perhaps doesn't need a huge labor force to manage that. But at the same time, people who live and work in the West and manage those landscapes on the behalf of the public are not represented on this stage today. Is that workforce worth preserving, to paraphrase the question? And I turn it back to any of you.
Public land management.
Our public land managers.
Well, I'll give you my opinion. I think the problem that we've got and have had for a number of years, there was 300 people work for the Forest Service when I first came here. There's now less than 50. The focus has been to move the people away from the land they're supposed to be managing. I don't know how many Forest Service employees work in Washington, D.C. They don't have a single forest there. So they need to come to the realization that the people need to be back on the land and part of the community. And I don't know how we get that done, but I've always said, and everybody says I'm crazy, but I've always said the highest paid employee for the Forest Service should be a district ranger, not some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. that shuffles papers for a living. So I think it's worth saving.
I'd say yes, Jeff. But those people have to be able to do their job. Because they're not because they don't want to, not because they don't know how, but they're not allowed to do their job in our current system. So absolutely, yes, people on the land working can benefit the whole, but but they need to be able to do their job. And as far as employment, Evelyn, all of us are really valuable in this community, and what we bring is lots of different things and different ages. And we have a great way of coming together to solve problems and being innovative. And I think that's part of this place. And so I always feel like there's hope for, and we had a conversation like hope isn't something bad, like you just sit on your hope and you don't do anything. Hope motivates me. I'm motivated towards the things I'm hopeful for. But people in ag anyway, Nick and I were saying, you know, we're less, you could look at that lovely chart, less than 2% of the people in the United States. We haven't been counted on a census for over 10 years because there's not enough of us, and we're feeding the United States and a lot of the world. And our younger people, a lot of them, actually just people, I'm gonna take younger out of it, don't want to work. It's hard. They don't want to sweat. They don't want to get dirty. They don't want to work 7 days a week. So I'm seeing in Wallowa County, younger people have given up the things they thought were important in other areas, and they're coming here. And we have room for that. We can make room for that. It may not look like the same model, but you know, if I have, and I do have a pasture with a ditch running through it, and somebody wants an organic garden, I've offered that to people who are new and they come here and like, we're gonna have a, you know, market share, go to the farmer's market, sell vegetables. And I said, well, there's a piece, use that. I'm not using it. And they're like, what? You know, I had to till that up, and I got to get some seeds, and I'm going to have to water every, yeah, actually, that's how you grow food. So, so that's a piece that's really missing. I don't know how we're going to solve that yet, but people need to work. They need to understand how awesome that is, what a great feeling it is to be productive at the end of the day. And it can look like a lot of different things. But to Nils, your question about corporate ownership, no, that doesn't work. It works to make people rich, and that's their value, and that's okay. It's okay. It's just not a value that tends to the land very well. If you look at corporate owned agriculture compared to family owned or private owned agriculture, two different animals. It's not the same, and it's not positive in my opinion.
Rich, last one.
So I'm going to take you back to housing. I moved in 1971. I got $10,000 a year from the Extension Service. Bought a house for $18,000, a house and 5 acres for $18,000. Okay. Now you've got the new houses in the subdivision in Joseph, small houses are $500,000. Your house that you remodeled in Wallowa is $290,000.
No,
Can one of your
it's
employees?
not, just so you know.
What is it?
250.
Oh, 250? You cut the price down
No,
already.
we never put it at 290.
Anyway, can one of Nick's guys making $86,000 afford to buy a house in Wallowa for $250 and drive to work here? It seems to me, I know that the Joseph School has said we can't hire teachers because they can't afford housing. The hospital is sending people who already live here and work in housekeeping to go be a respiratory therapist because they have a place to live here and they can afford to train them for 2 years to come back here. So what are we going to come? Are we in Wallowa County coming to the place where unless you marry into one or are in the family, rich people are going to chase us out? How are you going to confront that housing?
No, I mean, and I referenced that briefly in my opening remarks, just about gentrification, right? Gentrification is a real problem across the rural West, particularly places that are as beautiful as this. It's something that I think it's a real challenge in the West because some of the solutions are counter to kind of our central idea of being in the West, right? About sort of being more libertarian, more private property rights and, independent. And some of these challenges that are driving that, they need different solutions than I think we're often willing to take to counter those trends. Because the trends are just driving up housing prices and values and gentrification. And as you pointed out, although again, I'm new to all the housing things, but HUD and Oregon Housing Community Solutions and one of our advisory board members who's been working in affordable housing for 25 years tells me that 250 is very affordable to anybody at 100% AMI or less, which means $65,000 or less. So I'm not going to debate this. I'm just telling you that's where we got this from. But it, you know, it's a real challenge, and we need to think up new and different solutions to meet that challenge. I used to joke with Mike when he was in the county commission that in Norway, many places are zoned across, particularly across working landscapes, as only eligible for permanent residents. End of story. You can't have corporate ownership. You can't have second home. You can't have vacation rentals. You have to live there. Second, you have to produce something, right? So you can't just be a professional services person on that chart and live in a beautiful place. You actually have to work the land. And it has maintained the nature of farming, ranching, forestry in Norway and the rural communities. But we're not ready to do something like that, right?
Why not?
So, don't ask me. Don't ask me.
Don't say
So-
no.
More taxes, same thing, you know, it gets
Yeah.
money.
Yeah. But it's, yeah, we've got to get creative. We got one comment from the back.
Now said that they can rent out their apartments, their homes, and B&B type places.
Right.
Because they wanted their community back. They didn't want all these visitors want to come. There's hotels for them, but not the communities that are homes for the people that live there.
Right. All right. Well, we're going to take a 10-minute break. And then we've got one more little activity centered around what this concept of a stewardship economy. And we'll wrap things up.
Thank you for good questions and conversation.
Maybe I'll just provide a little bit of background to Wallowa Resources creation, and Mike already touched on some of that, and then and how and why we call that the stewardship economy today, and what we see as central elements to that. Provide that maybe as food for thought as you go into the final exercise. So, and I won't talk, I mean, I could talk very long about it because I've done that with a lot of student groups over the years, but in short, Mike referenced that there was a shift in federal land management. We lost our mills. At the time, the mills were the largest private sector payroll provider in the county, with some of the highest wages in the county. And not only did they account at that time just on themselves, the mills, for over 10% of total employment. But then when you added the loggers and the truck drivers and the mechanics and everybody else associated with that chain of work, it was, well over 20%. Some people have put it sort of high 20s that were impacted by the loss of the mills. And there was a cascade of events that led to a lot of young working families and kids moving out of the county, finding other work. School enrollment went down, school budgets were cut, teachers were cut, programming was cut. So our populations and our families declined even more. And at the time, the Wallowa Hospital saw this dramatic decline in people on private health insurance, and a lot of people not able to pay their bills. And so they almost went bankrupt. Against that background, and this was before I got here, you had people reacting out of fear and anger that tried to burn down the Forest Service building, which eventually did burn down. But on its own, and as many people have read about and commented about, they hung two of the leading environmental leaders in effigy on Main Street in Joseph. But separate from that, you had our county commissioners, particularly Ben Boswell, Pat Wortman, that brought people together more along the lines of what Liza Jane was talking about. Like, okay, how do we come together to solve this problem? How do we try to get ahead of it? And create a new vision, and also understand what we need to act on that vision. And they did a number of things. They created the Natural Resources Advisory Committee to bring people around the table to talk about these things. And part of that was to work with the Nez Perce tribe and many others to create the Wallowa County Nez Perce Tribe Salmon Habitat Plan. That has its own history. One of the things in terms of the story I'm telling now is it got people used to coming together, collaborating, working together to solve a problem. Many, many different people. Then they passed the county's strategic plan for economic development, which reaffirmed that even in the face of this crisis, that this county wanted to maintain, they welcomed diversification, but they wanted to maintain the strength and viability of the natural resource sector, farming, ranching, and forestry. And then they decided they needed a nonprofit. They needed a nonprofit because capacity was low. County timber payments had declined. That meant that county staff had declined a lot. Forest Service staff had gone down. Over a short period of time, it went down, as he said, from 300 people to 40 some people. And we needed more capacity in the county. We also needed another vehicle that had access to different forms of capital that could bring money in to reinvest in any of the new ideas that would help put people back to work. They created Wallowa Resources. Their founding mission was to promote forest, watershed, and community health first, create family wage jobs and business opportunities, and broaden people's understanding of the shared importance of community health and ecosystem health. So we had three tenets to that. We had a land stewardship piece, a job creation piece, and an education piece. And that was our founding mission. And when I got here, I think we were 2.5 people and we had a budget of less than $100,000. And so it was, we were very much a startup. We had to do a lot of R&D and just try different things. Luckily, the community had already developed a pretty broad strategic plan laying out where they wanted some of that R&D and pilot initiatives to take place. So when I came in with experience from implementing projects, community-based projects in other places, it was pretty easy to take this playbook and run with it. And we found an opportunity working with the federal government, the state government, and private landowners to put people that had traditionally been loggers to make them stewardship contractors. And at the time, right about when I got here, the value of timber harvests in Wallowa County was far less than the value of federal and state service contracts to do other type of land stewardship, land management work. But our contractors won 95% of the timber harvest and only 15% of the service contracts. And so helping them diversify to pick up some of this other work was a way to try to maintain our contractor base so that we still maintained people that had the local knowledge, the tools, and the experience to manage this land, but just to do a broader range of things. And eventually that sort of expanded. We started our youth education programs. The schools had gone to a 4-day school week. We started an outdoor school on Friday, both to help parents that now they had a supervised place to send kids on Friday, but also to really be thinking about continuing to build within our youth an understanding of the importance of place and our role in caring for and stewarding place, and introducing them to the innovations that were happening in agriculture and forestry that were exciting, so that they weren't thinking about those industries as dying industries, and that the excitement was elsewhere, that there was a lot of excitement in those industries and in those occupations here. We had a for-profit subsidiary investing in value-added processing here, and on and on. And then it was just, 2 years ago that the board was thinking about, when we started, we faced a situation where the county had 20+% unemployment in the winter, and a lot of underemployed people. Today, labor is scarce. So today, when we recently finished a survey of the 15 wood processing facilities that buy wood out of the northern blues, out of Wallowa Whitman and the Umatilla National Forest, every single one of those mills said a primary constraint to their long-term viability was labor. It was not log supply, which they would have argued in 1996, 2000, et cetera. It was labor. That they all had difficulty filling shifts. And some of them didn't even run because they'd show up in the morning at 5 a.m. and they'd count and they didn't have enough people to run a shift and they would shut down for the day. So we started looking at this idea of, how do we help with workforce development? And part of the problem with workforce development is also a lack of affordable housing. And we heard that across the board, whether it was county or local government, the sheriff's office, the schools, the hospitals, they all talked about a difficulty recruiting and retaining labor because people wanted to work here. The same reasons that Liza Jane and Nic referred to, came here excited to work here and then realized they couldn't find a home that they could afford on the wage that they were going to earn. So that idea that we're sort of flexible and adaptive as a community, but also as a nonprofit partner to our community, I think has served us well, but it's also begun to challenge some people's perceptions about sort of this non-elected group of people that are doing more and more things. And we need to figure out how to bridge that and rebuild as a community the same sense of purpose and understanding of each of our roles, and more trust and confidence that we're all working together. In doing that, we've tried to articulate this idea of a stewardship economy. And we talk about the stewardship economy first and foremost being a recognition or a sense that the most, as I said in my opening, we believe that the most important values that the rural West has are the land and the people connected to that land. That we shouldn't be just treated as some generic place, as Mike was saying, to put a youth detention center or a call center, right? Or, just a bunch of remote workers that are working for a tech company, but enjoy being here so they can go backcountry skiing, right? We need to retain as a core people that live here year round and care for the land and care for each other and make a community vibrant and whole. That's the first part of it. And then, I was, second part is to recognize and figure out how to build again the value, both the dignity, but also hopefully the monetary or the economic value of the work we do here again. And Senator Vilsack, Secretary of Ag, the past Secretary of Ag, Vilsack, said, and I think he was probably quoting other people, but it struck home with me that the 2% of the people that are still involved in agriculture produce such a surplus that most people don't have to think about it. So they can diversify and invest in their competitive advantage in whatever it is. And in the West, a lot of it's around tech or entertainment or finance. And they can do that and put 100% of their time and energy into that because people here and across the West and around the world provide them cheap food. And if they had to figure out how to provide their own food and build their own shelter and make their own clothes, they'd be in a completely different situation. But they don't understand the benefit that they're basically free riding off of this surplus that the few people still connected to the land are producing, that allow for this incredible amount of wealth to be generated in our cities and other places. And somehow we need to make that realization clear and reconnect people like Liza Jane's story did, of the people that buy from her, not because they thought the meat was so much better than any other meat, but they like the connection to her, her family, and the way they talk about caring for the land. How do we build on that and turn that into relationships that bridge rural urban areas, but also better on-farm economics that make farming, forestry, ranching viable today and really motivate the next generation to take on these jobs. And I think we can do it when we're talking about the value, if we commit to and really talk about the value of producing high quality food, sustainable wood products, renewable energy, all the while that we also talk about caring for the land, maintaining the health and quality of our soil, of fresh water, of our fisheries, of our wildlife habitat, contributing to other things that people care about, like climate change and the ability for these working landscapes to become real carbon sinks and contribute to it, or avoid big carbon emissions from wildfire. Those are all things that a stewardship economy can contribute to. And I think we're seeing through a whole series of online communications. We have a monthly phone call with people all across the country around to share stories, different stories from different communities about stewardship economy. That this idea resonates with people. And I think we want to see, does it resonate with you all? And since it is not meant to be distinct from, separate from other ideas, it's meant to be an integrator. So it's an integrator of a recreation economy, a restoration economy, and like a true sort of historic and still really important agrarian economy. How do these pieces fit together here and help bring people together with a common vision that caring for the land and caring for the community is our number one mission and purpose? And that will allow for and needs to have diversification for the reasons we talked about earlier today. But that is fundamentally important to this place, to the value that we can create that is meaningful and different than the value that Seattle can create or Portland can create or San Francisco can create. So I think that's what we want to talk about. All right. So how does this exercise go again, Avery? I'm going to let you explain this exercise.
Yeah, we kind of threw Nils into the gauntlet here, very last minute, since I wasn't able to make it. But yeah, thank you so much. So Elena and I are gonna split you into some smaller groups of 5 or 6 people as you'll look around there. And Zoomers, you'll all be in one group facilitated by Lars. So there's some posters up in the different corners that kind of talk about some careers within each of these different industries or economies. And there's some questions on this paper for you and your group to reflect on. And Elena and Nils and I will be walking around to kind of guide the conversation and help you with anything that you have, any additional questions you have. So without further ado, we'll split you into groups. Yeah. No, we'll walk around and kind of split you into where you're near, so you don't have to walk across.
Everybody have one of these? Yeah, no.
Okay, so this you in there. You guys will be recreation and you're hosted by I'll be back.
Okay. So 2 copies of it.
You'll be. And hopefully you have a spokesperson to
Megan gets my
share
vote.
your
All right, Megan.
reflection.
Roger, we're going to talk more about that because I was just talking to someone about
Poor
that.
Megan just got voted.
I feel like I wasn't listening enough in the beginning, but I'll do my best. Okay. Oh, hang on a second.
Thank you guys for being so eager to participate today. For those that weren't in my group earlier, I'm Avery Stanton. I'm the communications manager at Wallowa Resources. And lovely woman in the fox sweater is Elena Kessler, and she is a communications coordinator for our forest program. All right, so we will start with the restoration group. Did you guys have a spokesperson? Perfect, Jeff.
Thanks, Avery. Okay, so we had some fun with this. We had a good group, and so restoration slice of the economy, examples would be forestry contractors, watershed restoration, monitoring research, etc. And we figured if that was the entirety of the economy, there would be lots of seasonal workers, no benefits, but better parties. Kind of a precarious existence, often with people looking for a plan B. What's their next thing going to be? A lot of transients. Also, because of the nature of the funding, a lot of grant funding. So, you know, challenges there in terms of certainty, whether it's coming or not. There'd probably be some age stratification. There's a data management, data crunching part of that economy. So, you know, the older folks would be getting those jobs, the office jobs, computer jobs. The younger people would be out there piling brush and burning and putting in beaver dam analogs and so forth. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Thank you for sharing. All right, our innovation group next. Perfect, beautiful. Okay.
Innovation, our examples were electricians, biomass engineers, solar panels installers, and drone pilots. We riffed for a little while on what other things might fit in the educational in innovation. Themes were, we're going to need a really robust training sector because these are new kinds of jobs. And we talked a lot about apprenticeship programs, college, community college programs, retraining of replaced or retiring workers. So education will be a big theme. It's going to need to be people who like teams, because these folks are always supporting somebody else. It's not something you just do all by itself. So that would be new. There would need to be, we were hopeful that this might support living wages because these are pretty skilled jobs. And so it might be a good plus for the economy. We talked about there would need to be, probably we would be seeing all kinds of subsidies, whether they were government or we didn't elaborate, but if you're going to be fostering wind power and solar panel and drones, this and that, you're going to need to have an incentive to be doing all of that. And that would be involving government probably. We would need people, we've talked about this a bit, but who like change, innovators, people who want to try something new, exploring new ideas. I'm looking at my team, hoping they're nodding, and I'm reflecting what they actually said. We also were going to have, I think, it's going to be what becomes your community. Your customer base is no longer just your next door neighbor. Your customer base for drone projects and energy projects can be quite a bit bigger than, say, my valley or this county. And so do we have to rethink what community even is? And then we talked about the workforce and how are they going to have a place to live and how are we going to have affordable lots? Are we only answering question one or should well, question two, we only had 3 minutes on, but we said we're going to have a really well-paid workforce and they're probably young. And so they're going to spend a lot of money on the recreation and the other two sectors, agriculture would also going to be hugely effective. And so it could be a great integrator for change the community. Did I sort of get it?
Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
About this.
Philosophers
to say how we handle all of this.
Yeah. Great. Awesome. Thank you. Lars, did you want to share on the, oh. Do you need, we can bump to the next. Oh.
I apologize to everyone on Zoom. I thought I was going to give you a chance to have the mic. They had some after Jeff, yeah, after construction, and some thoughts from the group were that we're lucky to have this here in Wallowa County, but to be overly dependent on it, it's risky because our population is so small. I shared with them some, I guess, just general information that Nic has shared on the healthcare sector here and what the clinic and all the providers have done as far as serving others from out of county. We have a lot of people coming in from outside the county because we have such good healthcare here. And they talked about the idea of potentially the intersection of tourism, healthcare tourism, or people coming here and staying and with the recreation. And I thought that was really interesting. And yeah, just, yeah, that was pretty much it. It was a good conversation. Thank you to everyone on Zoom.
Thank you, Zoomers. All right, next over to Agrarian. Back to Mike.
I apparently drew the short straw, and I must say that our group was pretty discouraged about this sector and saw relatively few opportunities and bright spots. I tried to keep interjecting ideas that I thought were really kind of cool, but nah, I can't do it here. So a lot of challenges, but some of the possibilities, at least, that were raised was some self-sufficiency in terms of food, enhancing that as much as possible, feeding the local needs, the hospitals, the schools, the restaurants, each other. We have challenges growing vegetables up here without greenhouses. That needs to be greatly expanded. There are opportunities. We've talked about the potential for cooperative marketing with a Wallowa County label and using that to create additional value and return for exported agricultural products. That although there have been some isolated attempts to develop that Wallowa County label, they're isolated. They don't penetrate the market, the urban markets. But Liza Jane talked about why people buy their beef here. If we can get a clientele, an export clientele in the urban areas on the west side of Seattle that value what we're trying to do, they might be willing to pay a premium. They might even be willing to help subsidize some of the other costs associated with producing that food, being partners in the stewardship along that. We talked about, just the lack of people to do the work. We talked about, utilizing the schools with FFA and 4-H and developing career paths for them. One of the big obstacles is access to land, and relatively few folks owning large parcels of land. So that's a challenge. How do you overcome that? There are absentee owners that are not working their land, and there are programs to match those landowners with farmers that want to farm. There's a question about whether people really want to work. It's hard work. I have the belief that there is a significant population out there of very eager young people wanting to farm, but not having access to land. And that's a huge obstacle. There are some organizations that are trying to create matchmaking, and there are federal programs that help new farmers and ranchers come up. We talked about the challenge of working in an international market, and the fact that so many are a portion of our agricultural products are exported internationally, and that our local folks are responding to international markets and pricing and those kinds of incentives. And so that is a huge challenge. We touched on a more socialist model of working together and developing more cooperative types of arrangements. And then I think we have some examples, very nascent examples, but I'm thinking of like Mary Hawkins, who developed poultry feed from all local produced ingredients, using grain growers as the miller. People could purchase them and raise chickens in their backyard. Those kinds of models of self-sufficiency and utilizing locally grown ingredients to do various things. I think there are a lot of innovative opportunities out there. People were discouraged, though, with the challenges associated, the small population we have, labor. There was a discussion about bringing in labor, itinerant labor, and all the challenges associated with that. Land use issues, the current land use allowing only for one house on EFU lands, and how that could potentially be modified to allow more people to live on farmland that are going to work that farmland. A lot of many big challenges, some opportunities, but I don't think we're quite there with the vision yet.
15 minutes. Thanks, Mike, and Ag. All right, recreation. Do you have a spokesperson? Beautiful, thank you.
Yeah, recreation. So I'm going to go back here to read. We modified slightly as we talked because some of the things that were listed here, like restaurant owner, rafting guide, state park employee, fishing guides, backcountry skiing guides, sporting goods store owner, campground maintenance. One of the problems, of course, as we all know, is that's pretty seasonal. Plus, a lot of those jobs are low wage, minimum wage, sometimes almost below minimum wage. And so that's not entirely sustainable. But in our conversation, we focused for a moment on the creation part of recreation, and acknowledge that we needed to expand some of that to acknowledge the role of the arts and culture in our community, which can actually expand beyond just the summer, and that we already have in place and are an important part. But then we also sort of talked about how could we switch the paradigm from recreation as being commodities to something where we are actually inviting people into a culture. So what if we were to combine some of these things like river rafting, and then have people who are going down the river spend some time with the Nez Perce fisheries people to talk about what is important there, and then come into like Joseph and look at the arts, because the arts here in our county are a very important part of telling stories. This is who we are. This is the land that we live on. And that, could sort of tie into the agriculture part there, sort of an agri-tourism is what it's been called. But if we understand it's a part of a culture that we're sharing, so expanding that idea, we have very important cultural events that involve the Nez Perce, and telling that story and inviting people in. So that was sort of what our conversation sort of moved towards.
Can I just ask one thing? You guys blew it big time by skipping arts and culture, okay? And right here in the damn fish trap building. Fish. Where is it?
Under community, not under.
Oh, it's under community? But listen, Nils, that arts and culture is big a part of the economy here as recreation is. We have year-round jobs at the foundry. We have Fish Trap, which has a few year-round jobs and brings people in and brings local people together and supports a few full-time jobs. We have the Homeland, which now how many employees? 4 employees, and brings people in the summer. So it's a huge. We have how many art galleries in Joseph, which is jobs. So I think that it shouldn't be under community. It should be its own part of the. And I think that also, if you say arts and culture, then we can bring in the tribal perspective too, because tribal economies and tribal cultures are a very important part of it. I mean, just look at what's happening in the conversation about the dam at Wallowa Lake and the impact that.
So you belong in all of the counties.
You belong. This is true, Bobby. Bobby says they belong in all of them. Anyway, that's fine.
Well, thank you guys so much for your participation. I think we ended on a good note of it's all of these together that bring the stewardship economy that make the model. We can't rely on just one sector. They're all equally important. I hope that even though we split you into groups, you were able to see yourself in the stewardship economy. And we invite you on the very last page to kind of reflect on that and what your role is in the stewardship economy, what your role is in your community. Yeah, and just take a minute, reflect on that, and feel free to share with us what you find. So thank you all.
Bobby?
From your organization to tell us a story, a little story about transformation or change that Wallowa Resources has been a part of.
All right. Well, I'll tell you the first story that came to mind. When I got here, Doug was working on his river restoration project, and Doug McDaniel, who had a place in Lostine. He grew up in Wallowa, and he remembered, he was born in 1935, and he remembered over his first 15, 20 years that the fishery on the Wallowa River being just phenomenal. And then after the war, when heavy equipment came back and they straightened a lot of the river, that the fishery went down. And he had a ranch and he wanted to restore the river and do it in a way that didn't really compromise his farm and ranch ground, but would create spawning and rearing habitat for fish. And there was a lot of questions and concerns about that project. The regulatory agencies were concerned that even though they saw the long-term vision for improving habitat, they were worried that because we had Chinook and steelhead both listed as under the Endangered Species Act, that the process of doing that would create a loss of these listed fish, which would be illegal. And they weren't willing to take the risk. Downstream neighbors were very concerned that if we messed around with the river, that we would end up flooding everybody downstream. Other people couldn't see the vision that you could do this without compromising your farm ground and the value of your ranch or farm. And Doug and I worked on that project for 7 years before we finally got everybody to agree on a plan, and we got the permits to get it done. A key part of that was bringing in other players, and the fisheries department from the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, Alan Childs, was key with that. ODF&W, habitat restoration biologist, Grand Ronde Model Watershed, other people to help us sort of work with all of these partners and build some trust and confidence to let us take a risk. The risk panned out in that we turned the river into this new meandering channel in 2006, in the summer of 2006, in this limited in-stream work window that you have when you have ESA listed fish. So it would have been 15th of July to 15th of August or something like that. And after the spring flood in 2007, we already had 10 steelhead reds in that channel. And within 3 years, we had over 20 steelhead reds and 3 Chinook reds. And then they've just kept improving it. And with that breakthrough, then the regulatory agencies started permitting more and more of this. Because at the time, that had been the largest river that had been re-meandered in Eastern Oregon. They'd done some bigger ones in the West. But that led to many other rivers being re-meandered all across the Northern Blues. And it has substantially improved the spawning and rearing habitat that has helped stabilize the decline in population. We still have a lot of challenges with fish, but it's helped.
Point is, it doesn't happen overnight, but if you believe and you stay the course, you succeeded. Right. And I think that the exercise we went through today, it may not be perfect, Rich, but you're on your way someplace.
And with that, you folks can all hang out here and and continue the conversation. But we'll take a break and we'll be back. I think we're gonna, the Dutch Oven, the dinner starts at 6. I think the doors are at 5:30, but I'm gonna be here, so you're happy to hang out. And it's so encouraging to see these conversations and people not wanting to stop. It's like the greatest reward. I do want to say so much thanks to Wallowa Resources, all of you folks. You're working on a Saturday, man, and you put a lot of time into this. So thanks to all of you for allowing this to happen and taking time from your job to put this together. Totally. And with that, we'll take a break and we'll see you in a little bit.
Oh my God.